Hello everyone, I would like to welcome you all in chapter 4 Ethics and Acceptance. This is one of the most important chapter over all syllabus area and also one of the most important chapter of syllabus area. So let's start Ethics and Acceptance. First, Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics includes a principle that all auditors must comply with on daily basis, general threats to our ethical behaviors, and also safeguard to help to protect us from main threats. So let's move to us principles. So fundamental principle or ACCA Code of Ethics. For the easiness, we have made the mnemonic called PICO, P-I-C-C-O, PICO. So let's start it. First principle is professionalism. So auditor should not do anything that discredits profession. That is, auditor should respect laws and regulations. Second principle is integrity. So auditor should be straightforward and honest. Third principle, competence and due care. This means knowing the job. So auditors should follow all the relevant standards and maintain professional skills and knowledge up to date. Fourth is confidentiality. Auditor should respect privacy of the information and they should not disclose information unless it is legal or professional duty. There are some exceptions to confidentiality. So there are some areas where you can disclose the informations. So those areas are when law requires you to disclose, when client gives permission, when court orders to disclose, and information is in public interest to know, and last one is when ACCA is investigating auditors' work. So if you are in a dilemma whether to disclose or not, then it would be best to consult with the lawyer. So it means consultation with lawyer would be wise. So one more important thing that you should remember in confidentiality is that auditor cannot disclose information of client after resignation from the audit. So after the resignations also, they are not allowed to disclose the information of their client. So let's move to last point, objectivity. So auditor should not be biased. They should avoid conflict of interest and undue influence from the client. So they should be independent. Let's move to another subtopic, that is threats to objectivity, integrity and independence. So it is ethical threats. So for the easiness, we have made the mnemonic called IFAS, I-F-A-S-S. The first one is intimidation threat. So let's look at intimidation threat, what it is. When the audit team is deterred from acting properly by actual or perceived threats. Auditor is pressurized for ignoring financial statement error. So in intimidation threat, client will pressurize audit team member for ignoring financial statement error. So let's move to second threat, that is familiarity threat. So because of the close relationship, member of audit firm become too sympathetic to member of the client and they may ignore errors. So the objectivity and skepticism are lost. Third point is advocacy and management threat, where audit firm promotes a view of client or the opinion to the extent that subsequent objectivity is compromised. So in this case, auditor will promote client. Next threat is self-review threat. So under this, because of auditing or reviewing their own work, member of audit firm may ignore or may not spot their own error, due to which objectivity and integrity are lost. And last threat is self-interest threat. So under this, because of personal gain, that is financial or non-financial interest of auditor, member of audit firm may ignore financial error, so that fundamental principle, which is objectivity, is lost. So these 5 threats you should know. First one is intimidation threat. Second one is familiarity threat. Third one is advocacy threat. Fourth one is self-review threat. And last one is self-interest threat. So let's move to safeguards. So how to reduce or eradicate threats, ethical threats. Whenever an ethical threat is present, we must try to implement safeguard to reduce or eliminate the threats. So most safeguard against self-interest threat involves removing the situation that caused the threat. So for example, if the auditor has one share of client, then they should dispose of their shares immediately, or they should be removed from audit team. And self-review threat. In case of self-review threat, the safeguard would be separate team from each service and review of the work by an independent partner. In case of familiarity threat, remove the person with relationship from the team and appoint person with no connection with the client. And in case of advocacy threat, we should refuse any engagement that look like we are representing the client. And last one is intimidation threat. In intimidation threat, to mitigate it, we should consider the composition of the team or review by independent partner. So these are the general safeguard of ethical threats, and when we do constructive questions, we will discuss individually. Under self-interest threat, there are lots of threats that are included. So we are going to look that in detail when we will do questions. So there are many of safeguard refers to engagement, quality control, review. This means another person who has to involve in the audit, reviewing the files with independent pair of eyes. Area. So these are the area you should understand in a brief, and the particular safeguards for the particular self-interest threat we will discuss when we go to constructive response questions. So let's move to next topic, that is conflict of interest. So in what case conflict of interest may arise? So there are two cases where conflict of interest may arise. So one is when two clients compete in a same market, and another one is when two clients trade with each other. So let's write it. Conflict, just a second. Conflict of interest arises when auditing for two clients which interact with each other and each other. So that means number one, who compete in same market. Number two, who trade with each other. So conflict of interest is most common between the two clients that we have told. So when dealing with conflict of interest, where what is good for one client, that may be bad for another client, due to which we as an auditor cannot help one client without harming the other. So conflict of interest creates threats to objectivity as well as confidentiality. Will create threats to objectivity and confidentiality. The reason behind this is, as information of one client could reach another, and if audit paper is not kept secure and audit staff is not carefully dealing with their job, the sensitive informations of one client may go to another client. So before accepting new client, we should consider likelihood of conflict with existing client. So it is best to refuse the new client if conflict of interest may arise. So there is another area where potential safeguard would be possible. So it would be better, or we should tell both the client about what will be the conflict of interest between two clients and what the firm is doing to manage it. So what we are doing to manage it. So there are two cases for that. If both the client agree, then there are possible safeguard. So we will deal this in a little while. And if the client disagree, then we should means auditor should resign from one or both the client. So when conflict of interest arise, we should discuss that matter with both the client, and if both the client agree that we are going to do possible safeguard, and we are telling the clients that we are doing this type of things to manage it, and if they agree, then there will be possible safeguard, and there are few points under this. And if client doesn't agree, that means if they disagree, then we as auditors should resign from one or both of the client. So let's talk about the possible safeguard if they agree. So we are going to write only few points. There are many points, but we are only writing important points. So first is, we should use different partner head at each audit team. And second is, we should use third partner to oversee that team are kept apart. Another point is, there should be strict confidentiality rules to avoid crossover of paper work and information between two clients. And another one is, send separate audit staff from separate office if possible. So these are the few possible safeguards that we can do to avoid conflict of interest. So let's move to next topic, fraud. So what is fraud? Fraud means to gain unfair advantage. To gain unfair advantage. To gain unfair advantage. Okay, so so under fraud we should look at some of the important things. So it can be examined in exam for 5 marks relating to scenario or straightforward question. So you can be directly asked to write about fraud, or examiner would ask you to find fraud from the scenario and discuss them. So let's talk about fraud. So as an auditor, our primary duty is to report to the shareholder on true and fair view of financial statement. That means to assess risks of material misstatement and design response to those risks. So it is often result in financial statement that might not show true and fair view of the financial statement. So auditor has to detect material fraud that may lead to misstatement in financial statement as a resultant from the responsibility to report financial statement are true and fair view. So if misstatement due to fraud is discovered, auditors should report to audit committee or external regulators if law requires or it is in a public interest. So there is no legal obligation of auditor to prevent fraud, but there is an professional obligation of the auditor to advise client on how to prevent fraud. So under fraud, you should understand how, why fraud could happen, and also assess risks it has happened by testing control, and what is the impact on financial statement. So these are the things you should know, and you can go through books or notes to see this. It is easy one, and we will deal with this fraud questions also. So I am not writing the notes here. So let's move to next subtopic, that is ethical matters to be considered before accepting new clients or new engagement. So what are the matters that should be considered before accepting new clients? So there may be lots of points, but mainly there are 5-6 points that we are going to discuss. So first one is independence. So auditors should be independent from client. That means they should not be biased, there should not be any conflict of interest, they should perform their work with objectivity. So second point is resources. So under resources, it means that audit firm must have resources to take on client. Resources means they should have staff, skill, time, knowledge, everything. They should have everything sufficient to take new client. And third point is client screening. So it is also one of the most important points. Now, client screening means auditors should be aware of whether client might possess any threat to auditor reputation. So it's like scanning the client, whether they will affect our reputation while doing audit for them. So client screening, for example, if client are involved in money laundering, terrorism, treason, then that will affect our reputations. So client screening about money laundering, whether they are involved in terrorism or treason. So you should know these things. So let's move to next point, that is professional illegitimate letter. So this letter means this means incoming auditor must obtain clearance from the outgoing auditor before accepting the new client. So it means clearance letter. Clearance letter from previous auditor. We have done audit of our new client. So next point is pre-condition to audit. So under precondition to audit, there are two things that are: there should be presence of suitable framework and another one is director should know their responsibility. Okay, responsibility. So these are the 5 matters that you should consider before accepting a new client. So first one is independence. Auditor should be independent, and audit firms should have sufficient resources like staff. They should have skill to do whether they have skills on that industry that we are going to do, whether they have sufficient time or not, whether they have sufficient knowledge of the client or not. Then after, we auditors should do client screening, that is whether client are involved in money laundering, terrorism or treason. Then after, we have to obtain clearance letter from the previous auditor, which is also known as professional eligibility letter. And the 5th point is preconditions to audit. So there are 2 points, that is presence of suitable criteria. So there should be suitable criteria, and also directors should know their responsibility, and they should perform their responsibility. So mainly the director responsibilities are preparation of financial statement. Another one is providing access to record to auditor. Another one is prevention of error and fraud. So these are the main responsibilities of directors. So this ethical matters to be considered, we will also cover this in constructive response questions. So we will go in detail when we are going for the exam questions, or after ending this syllabus A, we are going in a depth to write answer of fraud and ethical matters also. So let's move to next subtopic, that is engagement letter. So what is engagement letter? So engagement letter is a legally binding contract between auditor and client. So I'll just tell you about it. It is not much important, but those things that are important I'll write for you. So engagement letter is legally binding contract that is between auditor and the client, which is sent by audit form to the client, and where both parties sign it, addressing to director as shareholders primary agent, which we have read in agency theory. So what is the objective of having engagement letter? So why do we need the engagement letter? The main thing to have engagement letter is to reduce misunderstanding between auditor and client. And another thing is, this engagement letter will create legal basis for payment. And another thing is, engagement letter should be reviewed annually. Why? To ensure up to date. So to ensure up to date, to know that they are up to date, they are okay, so we will review annually. But it does not need to revise, it does not need to reissue annually, unless there is changes in terms of engagement. So let's move to review annually. So why engagement letters should be reviewed annually? So there are some of the points I am going to dictate, so listen it carefully. So engagement letters should be reviewed annually because client may misunderstand objective and scope of audit. And another thing is, there may be revised or any new audit engagement, and there may be recent significant changes on ownership or senior management. So, and also there may be changes on rules and regulation requirement, financial reporting framework, and other reporting requirement. So this is the reason why we should review engagement letter annually. So there are 3 cases where we have to reissue engagement letter. So it means there will be change in terms of engagement. So when will be there changes to terms of engagement? Number 1, when there is new legislation, and second, when there is new accounting standards, that is IFRS or IAS, and another is anything requested by the client. So let's move to content of engagement letter. What are the content of engagement letter? So it is not the standard layout, but it is commonly used pattern, so I am going to tell this. So first content of engagement letter is objective to audit. So in objective to audit, we will see what assurance the client will require, whether they require reasonable assurance or limited assurance. Second is scope of audit. Under this, what auditor needs to check, in how much depth, and what do they need assurance on. So under scope of audit, we will see that, and then after we go for framework. So framework means suitable benchmark against subject matter. And another is responsibilities of auditor, that is to gather evidence, provide assurance on financial statement, whether financial statement do so true and fair view or not. And another is responsibility of directors, that we have read in preconditions to audit, and that are preparation of the financial statement, providing access to the record to the auditors, and prevention of fraud and error. So we can memorize it by 3 P's: preparation, providing, prevention. So you can remember in that way also. And another content is fee and basis of fee. So under fee, appropriate basis of fee should be based on skill, time. So the last content of engagement letter is deadline, timing of the audit report. So you should know that audit report should be signed before annual general meeting. So I'm not writing this point because I will provide note of this. I will attach this ethic and acceptance note down below, so you can go there and download that. So we have come to conclusion of chapter 4, ethics and acceptance. So it is one of the most important, as I have told you. So let's move from the first, what we have read from the first. Okay, so first we go through fundamental principle, ACCA code of ethics with the mnemonic PICO, that were professionalism, integrity, competence and due care, confidentiality, and last one, objectivity. Then after we move to threats to objectivity, integrity and independence. It is also known as ethical threats. So we memorize this threat by mnemonic IFAS. So first is intimidation threat, second is familiarity threat, third is advocacy and management threat, fourth is self-review threat, and last one, self-interest threat. Then after we go for the safeguard for the ethical threats in general. So we are going to discuss ethical threats and safeguard in constructive response questions in detail. So you should not have to worry, just you have to know that there are safeguards to ethical threats and there are threats. So you should remember these threats and that I indicated, that general safeguard. Then after we move to conflict of interest. So in what cases conflict of interest may arise? There were two cases: when client compete in a same market and when they trade with each other. And there were two cases when conflict of interest arises and auditor may told that we are going to provide a safeguard for this. So if both the client agrees, then there will be possible safeguard, and we have read 4 points here. And then after, if both the client disagree, then auditors should compulsorily resign from one or both the client. Then after we move to fraud, and we discuss about the primary responsibility, undetected errors, and indirect responsibility, and also professional obligations. And when we discover the fraud, we should tell audit committee or regulators if it is in a public interest. So we are going in detail, or we will write the answer of these questions, answer of this topic when we go for constructive long questions, as I have mentioned. Then after we move to ethical matters to be considered before accepting new client. It means what are the matters that we should consider when taking new client. So there were 5 points. Those were independence, and that auditor should be independent, resources should be adequate, client screening, clearance letter, preconditions to audit. We will go this in also detail when we do constructive response questions of ethics. Then after we move to engagement letter. Then we move to engagement letter. What is engagement letter? It was the legally binding contract between client and auditor. Then after we know, we see about annual review. annual review, why we should annually review engagement letter, and in which cases we will reissue engagement letter. Then after we look at the content of the engagement letter. So it is not much important important subtopic, but you should know in general that what is engagement letter, when should we review annually, and when should we reissue engagement letter, and what are the content of the engagement letter. So after this we conclude that chapter 4. So we are so chapter 4 is finished. Now we are going to start a revision session of the chapter 4, ethics and acceptance. So let's start it. So this chapter can be examined in multiple choice questions or constructive response questions. It can be tested. It can test knowledge of fundamental principle and threats that we have discussed, and we will do it in a constructive response question in our next video. Then after, it can be practical requirement to identify and deal with ethical issues. So we are also going to do this in our next video. Then after, the key areas that students should be happy with. So students must be able to define and explain 5 fundamental principles and threats that we have read above. And another thing is, students should be able to define and explain a relevant safeguard to practical ethical code that we are going to discuss in next video. And another is how to answer to the practical ethical question. So I'll give you a technique in the next video how to deal with practical ethical questions. So let's move to common mistake that the student makes. So student may be confused on principle and threats. So you should clearly understand the fundamental principle and ethical threats. And another one is learning names but not able to explain. So it means you are only learning the point. That means, like I have told you that it will be easy if we use mnemonic. Like for fundamental principle we use PICO. So if you just remember the point like professionalism, integrity, independence, confidentiality, objectivity, it is not sufficient. It is useless if you don't know what is professionalism. Under professionalism, we should not discredit our professions, and we should respect laws and regulation. We should know that. And under confidentiality, we should not disclose anything. And there were many conditions where there are exceptions, so we can disclose the informations. And also there were some points where after resigning or after completing the audit, we are not allowed to disclose the information. So you should know that. So last point is student not learning safeguard included in the code. So I will provide a safeguard in a next video. So that safeguard will be very specific to the threats. And another one is not able to explain impact of ethical threats in practical question that we are going to discuss in our next video. So you should not worry about these things. We will deal these mistakes, these key areas, and what will be examined. So you should not worry. In next video we are going to cover whole chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4 all, and we are going to write long question, some like 2-3 questions, and multiple choice questions, to 3 multiple choice questions. So I think that would be sufficient. So your assignment after completion of this course will be to see past paper or the kit for the MTQs and constructive response question. Just see that and try to write it, so you could get a confidence under that, and you could know some of the questions are easier. So we are going to deal with MTQs and constructive response question, as I have told you, in the next video. So in the next video we are going to do as I have told you, but also I am indicating at last, that is all technical knowledge, how to deal with MCQs, multiple choice questions, and constructive response question. We will practice 2-3 MTQs questions and also 2-3 constructive response questions, and we will practice based on exam pattern. So there we will go through past paper, and also we will go through kit, and we will do some of the questions. So I hope this chapter is one of the most important, and I hope you understand it very well. And if you don't, just see the video, and there were lots of points I have told you, so revise through the notes or book, so you should be perfect in this chapter. So this much for today. Have a nice day, and we will meet in next video. Thank you. Bye bye.